Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 116, Perfect Grade White Album vs the Strongest Zanpakuto Ryujin Jaka. One is hot, the other is extremely cold, and when they fight, it will destroy the world. Once involved, it is difficult for ordinary Shinigami captains to escape. Even the 1,000 Years captain would find it difficult to intervene in this level of battle. Therefore, it is not unreasonable for Shunsui Kairaku to choose to watch. Of course, in addition to this, there is also the idea of this old fox taking advantage of the opportunity to observe from the sidelines. Jushiro Yukitake is still trying to persuade. Teacher, what we are doing now is exactly what you taught us. It is you, teacher, who taught us to do our best to implement our own justice. We are practicing the justice you spoke of. Genryusei Shigokuni Yamamoto looked at Uehara Shiroha with appraising eyes, but said, "You three really disappoint me. You actually ruined the greater good for your own selfishness. In the face of the world's justice, your little personal justice is not worth mentioning at all. I have said that I will never let go of those who are lazy about justice. There is no point in saying more. Let's let our Zanpakuto tell the difference between right and wrong." Uehara Shiroha held Shunkyo and declared, "Ice Age." Facing the most powerful Shinigami in Soul Society, Uehara Shiroha took the initiative. However, he only used his standby ability. The perfect level proficiency of the White Album plus the first-class spiritual power and spiritual pressure created a scene like a natural disaster. The invisible cold current moved like a white ice dragon that froze everything and solidified time and space. Not only the moisture in the air, but even the air itself was about to be frozen. For a time, the cold wind howled, the frost condensed, the red clouds grew dense, and the sky and earth changed color. The Soul Society, which was originally sunny and green, suddenly plunged into cold winter. It's snowing. Looking at the large flakes of snow falling like silver gray, Jushiro Yukitake stretched out his hand, and it was icy cold. Feeling the sudden biting cold, he coughed a few times and quickly retreated. This distance was still unsafe. Just the initial release of White Season, Hakuki, has such power. Shunsui Kairaku also took a few steps back with a look of shock on his face. Uehara Shiroha's Zanpakuto had become even stronger. During the captain's test 20 years ago, the cold air that seemed to freeze the world was engraved in the hearts of all the captains and was still fresh in their memory. On this basis, the opponent could still increase the power of this cold air. This was really beyond imagination. Even Hyarinmaru, which is known as the strongest ice and snow Zanpakuto, does not have such power. They really didn't know how Uehara Shiroha practiced, and how he surpassed their 1,000 years of accumulation at such a young age. As the cold air continued, the surrounding weather had been completely changed. The large area centered on Uehara Shiroha, except for Genryusei Shigokuni Yamamoto, was all covered in silver, blanketed and frozen by ice and snow. Looking at the ice and snow in front of them, Shunsui Kairaku and Jushiro Yukitake exclaimed, "Ice Age! So that's what it means. This is indeed the real Ice Age." Such means were just his regular moves. Such strength and background, only the old man in the whole Soul Society could match it. Facing the whistling wind and the terrifying cold air sweeping across the world, Genryusei Shigokuni Yamamoto did not move, and suddenly burst out with a powerful spiritual pressure. His spiritual pressure was extremely powerful and contained the power of fire. The current captain commander was like a monster bathed in a coat of fire. The high-temperature spiritual pressure like fire dissolved all the cold air that was rushing in. He is worthy of being the strongest Shinigami in Soul Society, and his reputation is well-deserved. Uehara Shiroha truly felt the power of Genryusei Shigokuni Yamamoto. The opponent's spiritual pressure, body, mind, Zanpakuto and Zanpakuto spirit had all reached the limit of Shinigamis. This was the strongest person standing at the top of the Shinigamis. His spiritual pressure contained a very terrifying will of fire. Just the spiritual pressure impact could kill ordinary captains in seconds. Of course, in the attack just now, Uehara Shiroa only used the power of his substitute, and it was just a greeting. The strongest Shinigami was definitely not weak, but after all, it was just a Shinigami. And Uehara Shiroa's abilities and means had long surpassed the category of Shinigami and pointed directly to the Pseudo-Soul King realm. Uehara Shiroa, you have finally come this far. From the first day I saw you, I felt a familiar aura from you. You are very similar to us back then. Yamamoto showed a nostalgic expression and continued. Back then, we stepped on the bones of our enemies and crossed mountains of corpses and seas of blood to build everything in front of us. If you want to deny everything we have built, you must first pass this old man's test. It was because he felt the familiar characteristics of Uehara Shiroha that he looked at him differently. At the same time, he also knew that the other party was definitely not the kind of person who would keep to himself. He wanted to use Ryujin Jaka to verify whether the other party's strength could match his ambition. As the two spoke, the extremely cold air continued to pour out, and it seemed as if it was going to freeze the entire universe. Jushiro Yukitake and Shunsui Kairaku had retreated again and again. The two knew that Uehara Shiroa was building a home field for the battle and using ice to contain the flames of Ryujin Jaka. It was a bit too amazing that just one move could produce such an effect. Genryusai Shigakuni Yamamoto was also very shocked and exclaimed. Such a large-scale attack has such strong lethality that even this old man cannot withstand it. Shiroha, your talent really surpasses everyone else. In that case, let my flame bring you back on the right track. After saying that, he pointed his cane at Uehara Shiroa. The terrifying spiritual pressure enveloped it, and powerful flames seeped out. The scabbard-like outer layer shattered one after another. The Ryujin Jaka hidden inside finally appeared. The moment the Zanpakuto showed its true form, the nearby ice and snow melted immediately. Genryusei Shigakuni Yamamoto slowly began his Zanpakuto Shurikai, reduce all creation to ash, Ryujin Jaka. Unimaginable spiritual pressure gathered on the blade and turned into a terrifying flame. The Zanpakuto, which was originally an ordinary sword, rose up with a large flame, like a sea of fire. The red flames shot up into the sky, forming a terrifying flame column. In the light column, the Captain Commander's figure remained motionless. Under the burning flames, the ground under his feet began to crack and dissipate. Under the influence of high temperature, the surrounding air became distorted. The tall figure of Genryusai Shigakuni Yamamoto and the Zanpakuto in his hand also became blurred and distorted. Under the rising flames, the air was about to be ignited. He swung the sword lightly. Everything touched by the Ryujin Jaka, whether it was a wall or a rock, was transformed into erasure and disintegrated, and could not even hold on for a moment. The strongest and oldest fire-type Zanpakuto in Soul Society, Ryujin Jaka. Feeling the terrifying heat, Uehara Shiroa's expression became serious. The destructive power of Ryujin Jaka was unquestionable. The Shurikai surpassed the Bankai of ordinary captains. And the Bankai, it could even destroy the entire three realms. However, Bankai, if the duration was too long, even the user himself might be burned to death. This was a peerless weapon and could not be used easily. Of course, the power of Ryujin Jaka was also closely related to the powerful spiritual pressure of Old Man Yama. In the hands of Tokunada Tsuneyashiro, Ryujin Jaka was like a small flame, and it was difficult to light a candle. In the hands of Old Man Yama, it was like the eruption of a volcanic inferno powerful enough to burn rivers and boil seas. This was the gap, the absolute gap in strength and spiritual pressure. At this time, Yamamoto's divine light was restrained, and he was awe-inspiring without showing anger. The flames around him and his gaze seemed to have a force of 10,000 pounds, which made people breathless. Chapter 117, The Destructive Power of a Natural Disaster. As the flame fire dragon bit, the strongest Shinigami had already made his move. With a slash of his sword, the tyrannical spiritual pressure and powerful strike turned into a terrifying flame that covered the sky and sun, like a dragon heading out to sea, burning everything in its path. A massive dragon-shaped flame swirled and danced, wrapping Shiroa tightly. This scene resembled a volcanic eruption, like witnessing the end of the world. The burning flames, the impact of spiritual pressure, the slashing waves, and the extreme heat made the world change color. Nothing else existed in the world except the sky full of flames and unparalleled spiritual pressure. Once entangled by this terrifying flame, there was no way to escape. In the end, one could only watch as their body burned to ashes. And this was just a casual move from the strongest Shinigami. Seeing the flames and spiritual pressure more terrifying and hotter than in his memory, Jushiro Yukitake thought to himself with a worried look on his face. "Master, are you going too far? Is Commander Uehara okay?" He should have dodged it. He knew the lethality of this move, which was why he worried. Licking his dry lips, the normally optimistic Shunsui Kayaraku was also a little concerned. "Brother Shiroha, you better be careful. You're facing a monster that could destroy the world." But I haven't seen Old Man Yama this serious and excited in a long time. When he was very young, Shunsui had seen a painting of a monster bathed in flames. At that time, Old Man Yama told him the monster was terrifying and could even destroy the world. It had caused countless deaths and injuries. But it would never appear again. Later, Shunsui Kayaraku realized the true face of the monster. It was actually Old Man Yama after releasing his Bankai. And Old Man Yama had fulfilled his promise. From then on, he would not take action if he could avoid it. Not to mention Bankai, even Shurikai would not be used easily. Gradually, the monster that could destroy the world was forgotten. But today, Shunsui Kayaraku saw a trace of that terrifying monster again. He didn't expect that fighting Uehara Shiroha would make Old Man Yama so serious, almost breaking his oath. Shunsui was curious about what kind of terrifying strength his little brother possessed that could force Old Man Yama, who had been dormant for hundreds of years, to panic. "So, the gap between us is that big?" Shunsui Kayaraku adjusted his bamboo hat, and despite his shock, a hint of joy appeared in his eyes. With a powerful ally to count on, he could easily maneuver in the future. Now let's see how Brother Shiroha will deal with this move. Facing the flames that resembled a natural disaster, Uehara Shiroha remained calm and composed, his body not moving at all. It could only be said that Ryujin Jaka was worthy of being the strongest heat-type Zanpakuto. This move of engulfing flames was enough to kill ordinary Bankai Shinigami captains in seconds. As soon as they were hit by this flame and spiritual pressure, they would become drowsy and suffer burning damage. And this kind of injury would become more serious as the intensity of the flame increased. Anyone facing this flame, powerful enough to destroy everything, would understand that Ryujin Jaka truly had the power to destroy the world. The strongest Shinigami wielding the strongest fire-type Zanpakuto was truly terrifying. The destructive power was unrivaled among Shinigamis. With Bankai, the temperature would become unimaginably high, evaporating the moisture in the air and even igniting the blood in the enemy's body. In such an environment, even Hyarinmaru, the strongest ice-type Zanpakuto, couldn't activate its Bankai. However, the perfect level white album was in existence that surpassed Hyarinmaru. Uehara Shiroha's strength was not comparable to Toshiro Hitsugaya's. His ice power didn't rely on the environment, didn't require the cooperation of celestial phenomena, and was endless, freezing everything in its path. In an instant, Uehara Shiroha, who had always been low-key, burst forth with powerful spiritual pressure. The golden spiritual pressure soared into the sky, then immediately transformed into extremely cold air that froze everything around it. Under the terrifying cold air, the atmosphere around him turned into the most solid ice armor. Layers of flames collided with the thick ice armor but couldn't move forward at all. Even the terrifying heat couldn't penetrate. The terrifying flames didn't even touch his universal barrier and were blocked outside. Spiritual pressure collided with spiritual pressure, flames competed with ice, and extreme heat collided with freezing cold. When the two fought, the whole world was divided into a strange sight of half extreme cold and half raging fire. Hot, hot, hot. Cold, cold, cold. Under the ravages of the cold current and high temperature, Shunsui Kayaraku danced and retreated repeatedly. In a short period of time, his spiritual pressure and physical strength had been heavily depleted. This was more than the drain from fighting in person. This was merely the aftermath of the battle between the two. If one were at the center of the battle, it would be even more deadly, probably like being in hell itself. It's unbelievable that even retreating to this distance isn't safe. Joshiro Yukitake, who possessed the Soul King's right arm, was also stunned and exclaimed, "This is just their Shurkai. This power is too strong." He even questioned whether his own Shurkai and Captain's strength were genuine. His Shurkai and strength were not remotely comparable to these two. Because they were watching the battle at close distance, the two looked a little embarrassed and somewhat comical. Due to the influence of Ryujin Jaka, half of their bodies were hot with sweat flowing down their foreheads. The other half of their bodies were covered with frost and shivered constantly. At first glance, the two seemed to be standing on the dividing line between the tropics and the frigid zone, weird yet magical. In fact, it wasn't just the two who were affected by this. Whether other captains or ordinary Shinigamis, they all felt half their bodies cold and the other half hot. They had experienced hot days and cold days. Whether severe cold or scorching heat, they wouldn't be surprised. But it was their first time experiencing both cold and hot weather simultaneously. Of course, this would only shock and puzzle them, not frighten them. However, the terrifying spiritual pressure that came with the cold and hot currents made them fearful and even hallucinate. Sometimes they felt like they were in the deep ocean, with cold, loneliness, despair, and fear like dark blue water completely drowning them, leaving no escape. Sometimes they felt like they were in a volcanic furnace, every inch of their bodies on fire until they burned away. This top-level experience of ice and fire made the group of lesser Shinigamis feel like they were in torment. They either flew back and used spiritual pressure to resist, or drank water or covered themselves with quilts. This was the so-called "when gods fight, mortals suffer." What strong defense! What powerful ice ability! Your spiritual pressure is also impressive. But you can't beat me if you just defend. Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto praised while urging Ryujin Jaka to release an even stronger flame. After thousands of years of fighting, he had encountered opponents who could take on Ryujin Jaka head-on. However, there were only a few who could do it as effortlessly as Uehara Shiroha. Before he finished speaking, his figure disappeared again. With the perception of observation haki, Uehara Shiroha clearly captured the opponent's flash step trajectory. He didn't fall for the old man's provocation. The strongest Shinigami alone wasn't scary. What was scary were the few old veterans watching from outside. Even though Uehara Shiroha was confident in winning, he would act cautiously. The world of Shinigamis would only punish the reckless. He would never make that mistake. Soul King Yawatch, who absorbed the power of the Soul King, was powerful enough, nearly becoming the god of creation. But because he accidentally misread the future, he was killed by Ichigo and the others. In the original timeline, Old Man Yama was defeated again and again because he was too reckless. Although Old Man Yama's combat power was very strong, and the attack power of Ryujin Jaka was unparalleled in the world, he never fought with proper strategy. After a series of miscalculations, the strongest Shinigami could only die in a very frustrating way. Uehara Shiroha would not repeat the same mistake. Anyway, with the system, as long as he kept completing tasks, he could become infinitely stronger. He was destined to be invincible. This world would be his sooner or later. So, he wasn't in a hurry at all. After Yamamoto closed the distance again, he slashed with his sword once more. The spiritual pressure and flames on his body became even more terrifying. As the strongest Shinigami, his Zanpakuto was also strong to a level that ordinary Shinigamis could hardly imagine. The flames combined with the slashing technique directly cut through everything in front. Whether it was the rock icicles or the flowing clouds in the sky, or even the spiritual pressure pathway, all were broken by this sword. And under the influence of Ryujin Jaka, the cut objects instantly disintegrated and annihilated, with even the erasure that made up the objects burned clean. The temperature of these flames was more terrifying than before. And they seemed to have their own life, endless, powerful, and able to last for a long time. But such powerful flames and slashes were once again in vain. The strongest killing move of the strongest Shinigami couldn't even break through Shiroha's ice armor defense. Helplessly, Yamamoto could only continuously release spiritual pressure to swing Ryujin Jaka and increase the power of the flame.
He only now realized that the surrounding ice and frost were a bit of a hindrance.
Ryujin Jaka was strong enough to destroy celestial phenomena, but facing the home advantage created by Uehara Shiroha, it was actually suppressed. Therefore, he could only increase his strength.
If the battle goes on like this, Old Man Yama will be exhausted to death.
After thinking about it, Shiroha didn't want to be known as the one who defeated the old man through exhaustion. The perfect level white album could freeze the air, and after adding his spiritual pressure, it formed an indestructible defensive armor.
Moreover, this defense had no blind spots.
Unless it was a rule-based ability and absolute power suppression, it was impossible to break this defense.
Old Man Yama's Ryujin Jaka was indeed very strong, and its attack power might even exceed the limit of the Shinigami. However, Uehara Shiroha's white album wasn't weak either.
Unless the opponent activated Bankai, it was impossible to break this defense. Therefore, the battle had become a competition of physical strength and spiritual pressure.
In terms of spiritual pressure, Old Man Yama wasn't inferior.
But physical strength, as far as the stats panel was concerned, all of Old Man Yama's data were 100, absolutely the peak of the Shinigami. But only his physical strength was merely 60 points, just passing. Therefore, Shiroha could defeat the opponent by standing still. It was just that this seemed a bit unfair, and even if he took the initiative to attack, the opponent still couldn't break his defense. In other words, no matter what, he had no risk.
Considering that Aizen's side was almost done, Uehara Shiroha decided to speed up the pace of the battle.
So, fire and ice clashed again. The earth was torn apart, the air was trembling, and even the sky was covered with fire and ice. This magnificent scene was both awe-inspiring and dangerous, like the end of the world. The two tacitly used their abilities and slashing techniques to fight. Uehara Shiroha's Zanpakuto spirit was also at the level of a top captain, and his physical strength was more advantageous. The endless power of extreme cold and the cold blade gradually engulfed the flames and figure of Yamamoto.
Master Yamamoto.
Jushiro Yukitake was shocked. He did not expect that the teacher who opened the Shurkai would be suppressed. Originally, he thought that the teacher would suppress Uehara Shiroha. Yukitake did not underestimate Shiroha's strength, but he knew how terrifying Yamamoto was. In his opinion, even if he and Shunsui Kayaraku combined their strength, they were no match for the teacher. Under normal circumstances, Shiroha should have been crushed by the teacher and then lost without any suspense. In other words, he had actually overestimated Uehara Shiroha's strength. But unexpectedly, the real situation was just the opposite. Shunsui Kayaraku was slightly stunned, and then exclaimed with interest.
It turns out that Brother Shiroha can move while maintaining defense. Offense and defense are integrated, no flaws. This Zanpakuto ability is too perfect.
It seems that the title of the strongest Shinigami will be replaced. He was a typical spectator who didn't mind making trouble. Anyway, it didn't matter who won or lost. They were all family members, and it was no loss to have the meat rot in the pot. What was there to worry about?
Moreover, losing this battle might not be a bad thing for Old Man Yama. On Sokayaku Hill, the battle between Ichigo Kurosaki and Byakuya Kachiki had reached a fever pitch. Both sides had activated their Bankai. However, after seeing Ichigo Kurosaki's Tensa Zangetsu, Byakuya Kachiki was very dissatisfied.
Yours is not Bankai at all. Such a tiny Bankai does not exist. Normally, it takes 100 years to complete the final release of Zanpakuto, you can't be so fast. This was not necessarily true. However, he always felt that the other party's Bankai wasn't right, but he couldn't tell where the problem was.
Anyway, there was a problem.
Ichigo Kurosaki was also very dissatisfied with this.
Can't he be thin and fast? After a disagreement, the two sides fought again. After the tempering of the 5 elements barrier, Ichigo Kurosaki's strength had increased greatly.
Since being crushed by Uehara Shiroha, Byakuya Kachiki had been training hard over the years. After a few exchanges, the two fought evenly. However, over time, Ichigo Kurosaki's lack of combat experience and soft-heartedness became apparent.
In the spiritual space, White was already eager to come out.
He couldn't beat Uehara Shiroha, and couldn't handle the perverted 5 elements barrier, but why couldn't he kill a mere Shinigami captain?
In the dense forest, Yaruchi Shihoin and Suifone once again engaged in a fierce battle.
With her superb hand-to-hand combat skills and flash step, Yaruchi gained the upper hand.
However, her moves were very restrained, without any killing intent.
Suifone's mouth was very harsh, but her actions were also very soft, and she never tried to seriously harm her former mentor. It was not long before the two of them decided the winner. At this time, in the underground meeting hall, Toshiro Hitsugaya was lying on the ground, gasping for breath.
He was defeated, completely defeated.
In terms of intellect, strength, and even eloquence, Aizen was far superior to him. His last thought before his consciousness fell into darkness was,
"Fortunately, Commander Uehara is there to protect Hinamori." "Thank you, Mr. Uehara." Jin Ikamaru next to him smiled and said, "The captain of the 10th Division Bankai is so vulnerable. Captain Aizen's strength is really terrifying. It's just that the opponent is too weak."
Aizen didn't even look at Toshiro, who fell into a coma due to excessive blood loss, but said softly,
"If it were those two people, they would be able to do the same thing. What a fierce battle." While saying this, he focused on sensing the battle between Uehara Shiroha and Genryusai Shigakuni Yamamoto. Aizen was very concerned about the strength of these two people. Chapter 118, The Strongest Shinigami Defeated, the Three Realms Shocked.
After all, one of them was the biggest obstacle to the plan, and the other was an unpredictable variable. So Aizen was very concerned about their combat data and psychological habits.
"It's really scary." Jin Ikamaru pretended to be very scared and said, "Uehara Shiroha can actually suppress the strongest Shinigami.
Such talent is too exaggerated. Captain Aizen, this test has caused big trouble."
He was getting more and more confused about Uehara Shiroha.
Aizen, the riddle man, was better. After all, he had been lurking beside him for such a long time.
Recently, with Aizen's frequent and even overloaded use of Kyokusu Uegetsu, he had almost figured out a way to counter it.
However, he couldn't be sure whether his guess was correct.
As for Uehara Shiroha, it was even more outrageous.
Not only was his strength outrageous, but his scheming was also outrageous.
Until now, Jin Ikamaru couldn't grasp the other party's true thoughts.
Perhaps only someone like Aizen could guess Uehara Shiroha's intentions.
Uehara Shiroha is indeed an immeasurable and unfathomable person.
Having said this, Aizen looked up at the entrance to the underground council hall and said in a gentle and elegant manner,
"I think even in your era, Uehara Shiroha's ability is outstanding and extraordinary. Am I right, Captain Unohana?"
At this time, the captain of the 4th Division, Retsu Unohana, and the vice-captain of the 4th Division, Issane Kotetsu, walked in slowly. When she saw Aizen and the unconscious Toshiro Hitsugaya, she frowned and said in a clear voice with a hint of severity,
"What's going on? Why did you hurt Captain Hitsugaya? Why did you use a specially made corpse doll to pretend to be dead and hide here? Captain Aizen? No.
Now you can't be called the captain, but a treasonous offender, Aizen Sasuke." The more she recalled Aizen's corpse, the more she felt something was wrong.
And the appearance of Uehara Shiroha proved that Rukia's execution was definitely not simple.
With his status and position, he only needed one sentence to rescue Rukia.
However, Uehara Shiroha chose the most radical way and showed up in person to save people.
This meant that something had happened in the Central 46. The whole thing was a conspiracy. The most suspicious one was Aizen, who faked his death and escaped. And in the entire Soul Society, the best hiding place was this forbidden area that even the captains must not step into. Aizen still looked like he had a good grasp of the matter and said softly,
"It's about time for you to come.
It's really remarkable that you discovered the corpse and found this place. But unfortunately, you are wrong in 2 places. First, I came to Central 46 not to escape from anything, but for other purposes. Second, is this the corpse doll you mentioned?" As his voice fell, an extremely realistic corpse of Aizen himself immediately appeared in his hand.
Seeing this scene, Retsu Unohana's pupils shrank, realizing that things were not simple. How could this happen? Issane Kotetsu was shocked and panicked. When did it get in his hand and why didn't I notice it at all? When, in fact, it has always been there, I just didn't let you see it.
While saying this, Aizen threw away the corpse in his hand and released the ability of Kyoka Suigetsu. Shatter, Kyoka Suigetsu. After the corpse fell to the ground, it immediately turned into a katana-like shallow sword.
This sword was exactly Aizen's Zanpakuto Kyoka Suigetsu. Seeing Aizen perform a corpse transformation on the spot, Retsu Unohana's cold expression finally showed some ripples.
She had a very scary guess in her heart. Combined with some of Aizen's special behaviors, this guess became more and more real.
Seeing Aizen's corpse turned into Kyoka Suigetsu, Aizen Kotetsu was dumbfounded and asked, "What is going on?"
This corpse, she had personally checked it, there was nothing abnormal, even Captain Unohana didn't see the problem. The only explanation was that Aizen used very powerful technology to make the corpse dull seamless. But now, the flawless corpse had turned into a sword. This was really too incredible. She felt like her brain was about to explode. The ability of Kyoka Suigetsu is complete hypnosis. Because there was still some time, Aizen explained. The so-called complete hypnosis is the ability to control the five senses. In other words, Kyoka Suigetsu can change the shape, size, touch, and even smell of an object. It can turn a fly into a dragon and a swamp into a flower field.
This is Kyoka Suigetsu. After a conversation, Retsu Unohana guessed the conditions for the activation of Kyoka Suigetsu and realized that there was something wrong with Tozen.
As long as you have seen the Kyoka Suigetsu Shirkai ritual once, you will be permanently controlled by the power of Kyoka Suigetsu.
Then conversely, if you can't see, you won't be hypnotized. Then, Kaname Tozen, the captain of the 9th Division who can't see anything, would definitely not be affected by Kyoka Suigetsu.
However, the other party saw the corpse that Aizen had transformed with Kyoka Suigetsu, but he had no objection. The only explanation was that the two had colluded with each other a long time ago. At this time, Aizen had nothing to hide, and said openly,
"Yes, Tozen has always been my man. Now he is loyally completing the task for me."
At this point, his face changed, but it seems that he is in trouble, Jin. Hearing Aizen's call, Jin Ikemura waved his right hand. A long white bandage flew out from his sleeve, forming a cylindrical barrier that enveloped the two of them.
"What?"
Seeing this, Aizen Kotetsu, true to her name, rushed forward bravely.
However, when the white bandage disappeared, Aizen and Jin Ikemura had already disappeared.
This is a forbidden space technique, they have already left. Faced with such a dramatic change, Retsu Unohana remained calm. She drew out her Zanpakuto, slowly walked towards the seriously injured and unconscious Toshiro Hitsugaya, and told Aizen Kotetsu,
"Aizen, I'm going to give Captain Hitsugaya emergency treatment.
You're responsible for informing the captains and vice-captains of Aizen's action and the truth of the matter. Oh, and inform all the Ryoka as well."
"Yes, Captain."
Aizen immediately began to locate the positions of the captains, vice-captains, and the other members of the group.
At this time, Uehara Shiroha was swinging Shunkyo at Genryusei Shigokuni Yamamoto.
His observation haki activated, and a series of future scenes flashed through his eyes.
He caught the opponent's sword trajectory and the only flaw. Boom, boom, boom.
Shunkyo and Ryujin Jaka slashed at each other again, like a meteor hitting the earth, with amazing momentum. The flames and ice melted and collided, forming a shock wave that crushed everything. The slashing wave carrying cold currents and flames had unimaginable destructive power.
Everything along the way was crushed into powder, and then collapsed and disappeared. The sky collapsed, black cracks appeared, and the earth was crumbling.
This doomsday-like scene was shocking, and all the Shinigamis who perceived the scene trembled.
Shunsui Kairaku and Jushiro Yukitake next to them were even forced to open their shirkai and form a barrier for defense.
Although they were already some distance away from the battlefield where the two were fighting. However, the moves of the two were too strong, and they could not withstand it in their normal state. It was just that this time, Genryusei Shigokuni Yamamoto relaxed a little. He was old and physically exhausted, so he revealed a fleeting flaw. Shiroha, who had been prepared, did not miss this opportunity. He stretched out his left hand, ice sword. A sharp ice blade condensed in his hand in an instant.
By the time Yamamoto realized that something was wrong, it was too late.
With a flash of cold light, he had been hit. Looking at the wound on his arm, Yamamoto put down Ryujin Jaka. I am defeated.
He had a premonition that Shiroha might surpass himself one day.
However, he did not expect that this day would come so soon. After defeating the strongest Shinigami, Shiroha was very calm. You only release your Shurkai, there's no question of winning or losing.
In this battle, both of them were holding back.
This was just a duel of slashing techniques, and the old man only used Shurkai. And Bankai is the most terrifying and unstoppable power of Ryujin Jaka. At the same time, his white album actually has no restrictions on Shurkai and Bankai, and can release its power to the fullest.
From this perspective, Uehara Shiroha took advantage.
However, the opponent only hid one card, but he hid many trump cards. With so many powerful abilities, let alone winning against Shurkai Ryujin Jaka, even if he won against Bankai, Zenka no Tachi, there was nothing to be proud of.
Seeing Uehara Shiroha's calm appearance, Yamamoto admired him even more. Whether it was strength, mind, or capacity, Uehara Shiroha was first-class strong.
His loss was not unfair.
The teacher actually lost. How is this possible? Jushiro Yukitake stood there in shock. Until now, he still couldn't believe that the invincible teacher actually lost. This is a good thing for the old man. He should take a break. Shunsui Kairaku was quite open-minded.
The title of the strongest Shinigami, the interests of the nobles of the Soul Society, and the Gotei 13 had gradually become a burden for the old man. It was not easy to carry these burdens forward.
With Uehara Shiroha, the old man could be free. After that, if they made changes, the old man couldn't say anything.
On the surface, the strongest Shinigami abided by the rules, but deep down, he still respected the strong. Those nobles also thought so.
And now, Uehara Shiroha was the strongest. Then in the Soul Society, didn't he have the final say?
While thinking, he looked at the flames and ice on the ground and breathed a sigh of relief.
This shocking battle was finally over.
The impact of the battle between the two not only made the onlookers miserable, but even the entire Soul Society was affected. Now the place where the two fought had been completely changed, leaving only a few deep pits that were half ice and half scorched earth. The terrain here had completely changed, and the remaining spiritual pressure, ice, and flames had not dissipated for a long time. There were large pits burned by flames all around. Some places were still being disintegrated and dissipated by flames. If they continued to fight like this, it was really possible to destroy the Soul Society. Before, Shunsui Kairaku thought that the order of the Central 46 not to allow Shinigami captains to use Shurkai at will was a bit stupid. It's just Shurkai, can it destroy the world? Now it seemed that it could really destroy the world. The Shurkai of these two people was more terrifying than the Bankai of ordinary Shinigami captains.
If Shurkai was so terrible, what about Bankai?
I'm afraid it would destroy the three realms. At this time, all the Shinigamis and several vice-captains felt relieved. They began to breathe heavily, enjoying the fresh air that was neither too cold nor too hot. As the two terrifying spiritual pressures and the cold and hot air currents dissipated, they finally came back to life. However, the impression of Genryusai Shigokuni Yamamoto and Uehara Shiroha's strength and invincibility had already been deeply rooted in people's hearts. At this moment, the strength of the two was equal to that of gods in their hearts. At this moment, Sajin Kamamura, who was running fast, suddenly stopped. The wooden helmet that had been covering his face had been chopped off by Kenpachi Zaraki, revealing a furry face. His eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Lord Genryusai actually lost, this is impossible. Uehara Shiroha, has he become this strong? Unlike other Shinigamis who could only rely on instinct to feel the strength of the two, he used his spiritual sense to clearly feel the specific situation of the fight between the two. Therefore, he saw Uehara Shiroha defeat Genryusai Shigokuni Yamamoto. No tricks, no calculations, just a direct and upright victory. Uehara Shiroha's strength and demeanor made Sajin Kamamura have to admit it, but he couldn't help but choke up a little.
Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto lost, and he was more sad, more uncomfortable, and more shocked than the captain commander. Because of the special circumstances now, the news that Uehara Shiroha defeated Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto did not spread immediately in the Soul Society. Otherwise, all the shinigamis and nobles would be shocked and even dare not believe their ears. Now only a few captains who have noticed the situation here know the news. However, Uehara Shiroha, who intended to keep a low profile, would not take the initiative to spread the news. After all, with his current identity, status and strength, he did not need to pursue fame, because fame would chase him. And those old veterans hiding in the dark were once again shocked by Uehara Shiroha's powerful strength. In the shadow of the Siriitii, in the Invisible Empire, Jugram Hashwolf looked shocked. Your Majesty, the strongest Shinigami was defeated? The captain of the Gotii 13 has fallen to this level. It's unbelievable. Genryusai Yamamoto is indeed old. His heart softened, and his sword became dull. Yawatch on the throne snorted coldly. That's why I didn't include him in the top 6 special war potentials. Because he doesn't deserve it. The former opponent had become like this. And he had become the person he hates. Fate is really strange. Hashwolf said worriedly. Uehara Shiroha is on the list of the 6 special war potentials. And up to now, we haven't collected any useful information. Will this person become an obstacle for us? Before my eyes, both fate and the future must yield. Yawatch was full of confidence. No matter how talented Uehara Shiroha is, he is just a mere Shinigami. It is already his limit that he can defeat the aging Genryusai Yamamoto. In the face of fate and the future, he is powerless to resist. Moreover, the opponent only defeated Genryusai Yamamoto in a sparring match. Although this was also amazing, it was still under control. Of course, now, Yawatch had raised the threat level of Uehara Shiroha to the highest. On the list of the 6 special war potentials, Uehara Shiroha ranked first. This meant that he was the one who needed special attention and was the most likely to threaten their plan. This was a mark, a recognition of his strength, and also a reward. Chapter 119, The Decision of Squad Zero, the 5 Elements Barrier suppresses the Aizen Trio. In Karakura Town, Urahara Shop, Kisuke Urahara and Tezsite Sakabashi were using special equipment to watch the situation in the Soul Society. The two watched the fight between Shiroha and Yamamoto from beginning to end. After watching, the two were silent. After a long time, Tezsai said with a look of fear. Fortunately, I didn't say anything wrong when he came last time. Manager, no matter what you think of him, you must be cautious. It's best not to offend him ever. Now he understood why the T-gun was able to rise so strongly. Because Uehara Shiroha is the next strongest Shinigami. The status of the Gotii 13 is mostly maintained by the Captain Commander Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. In other words, it is maintained by his invincible strength. And Uehara Shiroha's talent and potential are obviously stronger. Then, Uehara Shiroha is the future of Soul Society and the overall situation. Fortunately, the other party in Aizen are not the same kind of people, otherwise they would have no chance of winning. Kisuke Urahara pretended to be relaxed and said, "How could I be his enemy? Even Captain Commander Yamamoto is no match for him, so what can a small shop owner like me do?" Although he said it lightly. But at this moment, his brain began to work frantically, thinking about various possibilities and ways to break the deadlock. In the end, he gave up helplessly. Just Aizen made him helpless, not to mention Uehara Shiroha, who was more terrifying than Aizen. Fortunately, although the other party's way of solving the problem was a bit radical, it was generally acceptable. Forget it, if it doesn't work, let those nobles die. Someone has to sacrifice. He really can't control this. In the Soul King Palace, the monk who calls the name, Ichibe Hayasube, stroked his beard and said to his subordinates with a smile. Yamamoto is really old, and the strength of this young man is becoming more and more terrifying. And that Aizen actually tried to do something like that, which is a blasphemy against the gods. That's what he said, but in fact, he didn't take Aizen seriously at all. Even if the other party's ideas are outrageous, and even regard them as prey. However, Ichibe Hayasube has seen many such ambitious people.
In his opinion, Aizen does not pose a threat.
But this Uehara Shiroa, he can't see through him.
But since the Soul King has not issued an order, it means that the other party is still under their control.
Ichibe Hayasube decided to wait and see. Anyway, they have plenty of time.
Oh, this is really a sad thing, that sword actually lost.
Otsu Nemea said in an exaggerated tone.
The passing of an old friend always makes people so sad.
However, it is so happy to have new friends join. Let's have fun. For him, the sword is more important than the person. However, this Uehara Shiroa's Zanpakuto is a bit strange.
Although it feels like there is no problem, the sword is still the same sword, but everything seems to be different.
However, he has gotten used to it.
After all, no matter how strange it is not as strange as Ichigo Kurosaki's Zangetsu. Uehara Shiroa's Shunkyo has traces, and it is indeed a Zanpakuto transformed from Asachi. And Zangetsu jumped out of thin air, and even he, the god of swords, does not know the specific origin. And this thing can actually use Shirkai and Bankai, which is outrageous. Two demon swords that shined brightly suddenly appeared, and he, the god of swords, was under a lot of pressure, but he was also very excited.
Hey, the old man isn't dead yet, why are you crying?
The hot spring demon, Tanjiro Karinji, was very irritable.
His tone and demeanor matched his pointed and protruding crew cut.
Although his tone was very arrogant, he was actually very shocked in his heart. Uehara Shiroa's talent and strength were so strong that he even surpassed him, Yamamoto, the strongest Shinigami. You must know that the title of the strongest Shinigami in Soul Society is not false, and his combat power is beyond the imagination of ordinary Shinigamis. Even if he is old, he should not be able to be contended with by a young Shinigami, let alone defeated.
This Uehara Shiroa has something. It's a pity that the opponent is just a simple Shinigami, destined to encounter his limit.
This battle may be the opponent's most glorious and powerful moment. Kiryu Hikifune, who has the title of ruler of grain, also recognized Uehara Shiroa's strength and suggested. With such great potential, it is not good to let him go.
Do you want him to join us? This Shinigami is indeed very talented, and even she couldn't help but admire him.
It would be a pity to leave such a talent down there. In her opinion, as long as the Royal Guard asks, he will definitely be happy to join them. Serving the Soul King is the highest honor for a Shinigami, and he should not refuse.
Can't everyone be as ungrateful as Genryusai Shigokuni Yamamoto and Kenpachi Kuruyoshiki? Recruitment?
The Great Weave Guard, Senjimura Shutera, smiled faintly.
He may not be our friend. Moreover, he will definitely not join us. I have good vision. Others just think that Uehara Shiroa has good strength and potential.
They even think that they can recruit this guy for their own use. But she saw at a glance that he was not an ordinary person. Such a person is not so easy to subdue, even for their Soul King Palace Royal Guard. We have no plans to recruit new members for the time being. We can put aside the matter of Uehara Shiroa for now. At this point, Ichibe Hayasube paused and continued.
Let's ask that Urahara to come over. Hasn't he always been interested in us? Just let him deal with Aizen. With Kasuke Urahara's talent, he is qualified to be selected as a member of the Royal Guard. However, he is Yoruichi Shihoin's close associate. The 5 great noble families still have to give face. It is also because of the relationship with the Shihoin family that an exception was made to allow him to set foot in the Soul King Palace. Uehara Shiroa and Aizen are just small problems. The king of the Quincy's who is ready to move in the shadows is the big trouble. Compared with this person, the Soul Society and Genryusai Shigokuni Yamamoto are simply insignificant. Ah, Captain Aizen, this is not right?
At this time, Jin put his hand on his forehead as if it were a visor, looked in the direction of Uehara Shiroa and exclaimed.
Am I hallucinating? Why did I see Captain Yamamoto defeated? Is this the strongest Shinigami in Soul Society? Even gods can fall, let alone a mere Shinigami. There was an inexplicable meaning in Aizen's tone. If Shiroa doesn't understand this, he will be nothing more than the next Yamamoto or me now. That would be a pity. So, Rukia, could you please come out of this barrier?
After saying that, he looked up at the five elements barrier in front of him.
The hope of transcendence was so close to him.
The Hogyoku he had been seeking was right in front of him. But this barrier blocked his progress.
Rukia Kuchiki looked at them fearlessly. Kanen Tozen, Jin Ikamaru, Aizen, what exactly do you want to do?
Although she was very stressed by being locked by three captains in the blink of an eye.
But she believed in teacher Uehara and didn't want to disappoint the teacher again.
So this time, she would never give up or back down. But she didn't understand why the three of them cared so much about her. She was obviously nothing special, and her strength and talent could even be said to be very poor.
Aizen's expression was still very gentle. I see.
It seems that you have great confidence in Uehara Shirowa's barrier.
Indeed, this barrier is very powerful. It is so powerful that even I am not sure that I can break it by force while keeping your life.
After all, your body and spiritual pressure are too weak.
However, I am not alone.
After hearing what Aizen said, Tozen, who had been silent beside him, stepped into the barrier without any hesitation. He thought that he would be strongly hindered or attacked by the barrier. However, in fact, he entered the barrier very smoothly. Seeing this scene, Jin and Aizen were both slightly stunned. How could such a barrier protect Rukia if it was so easily entered?
Only Aizen's eyes narrowed and he made a judgment in an instant. This barrier can only be broken from the outside. If you break through from the inside, you will definitely pay a heavy price.
The experience of Tozen also proved that his judgment was correct. Rukia was not far ahead, but Tozen could not get close to her. Because he was in danger now. In the barrier, golden light, water flow, vines, fireballs, and swamps took turns to attack endlessly, and the more they fought, the stronger they became. Even if he had the strength of a captain and amazing spiritual perception, he was still overwhelmed.
We fell into a trap.
Jin narrowed his eyes with a strange smile on his face.
Once you enter this barrier, you can't get out. He wanted us to enter the barrier. This is a trap.
He had a smile on his face, but he was not at ease in his heart.
He was once again shocked by the powerful strength of Uehara Shiroha.
Just a barrier made them helpless.
Uehara Shiroha's methods were a bit too strong and too comprehensive.
Originally thought it was just a weakened Aizen, but unexpectedly it might be a strengthened version of Aizen.
This is really interesting.
At this time, after observing the barrier, Aizen had come to a conclusion. The 5 types of attacks of the barrier are endless and can be continuously strengthened.
It is easy to get in but difficult to get out. Unfortunately, each attack is not powerful enough. Perhaps there are other changes hidden. It is really an amazing technique. As a scientific research expert, Aizen saw the extraordinariness of the 5 elements barrier at a glance.
Regardless of how powerful this barrier is, the new technology and special power contained in it are worth studying. However, for him, the most important thing at the moment is to obtain the Hogyoku, and the research on this barrier can only be postponed. Lord Aizen, the power of this barrier is increasing. Tozen keenly noticed that this barrier was full of mysteries, and it was not simple. He never thought that one day, he would be so embarrassed that he couldn't even break through the barrier that others casually set up.
Is the gap in strength really that big?
At this time, Aizen swung a sword at the invisible barrier in the air. The terrifying spiritual pressure burst out, and the powerful slash seemed to be able to destroy everything. However, the 5 elements barrier did not move at all, and seemed to be unaffected by any force. Seeing this scene, Jin and Tozen were surprised again.
Aizen's eyes flashed, and he said in surprise.
This barrier is more like a pure natural phenomenon than a technique.
It's an interesting structure, very worthy of reference. It's a bit of a headache. The time is almost up, we need to make a quick decision. He also felt a little competitive. He thought Shiroha was sure that he dare not step into the barrier. Today, he, Sosuke Aizen, accepted the challenge. Under the Sokayaku Hill, Ichigo Kurosaki and his friends reunited. He is seriously injured now. However, his opponent, Byakuya Kuchiki, is not having a good time either. He was defeated by the inner hollow, white. After that, Byakuya Kachiki, who felt that he had lost both the man and the battle, slipped away in an instant. Oraheim, who came over, treated Ichigo, who was also seriously injured. Shiroha saw all this. He knew that the reason why the action of the Ryoka was so smooth was partly because the captains and the vice-captains did not kill him. All the Shinigamis did not want Rukia to be executed. They also saw that there was something wrong with this execution. Not to mention Shunsui Kairaku and Jushiro Yukitake, who directly disrupt the execution. Even Suifone was only able to be stubborn and even asked Domida to stop Yukitake from rescuing people. Of course, Uehara Shiroha also knew that both sides were actually letting each other go and helping each other. Strictly speaking, every captain present should thank Kurosaki Ichigo for his grace of not killing. Several captains and vice-captains let the Ryoka go, and Ichigo Kurosaki let them go. Whenever the opponent faces a life-and-death crisis, and the power of the Shinigami, the power of the Hollow, and the power of the Quincy are fully activated, every one of these captains will be finished. With the full power of Kurosaki Ichigo, let alone his normal strength, even strong warriors at the level of Genryusai Shigokuni Yamamoto and Aizen will suffer. At this time, all the captains, vice-captains and Ryoka suddenly received a message from Tentikura. This is the 77th Bakudo technique launched by Isane Kotetsu. When using it, it is necessary to cooperate with Bakudo number 58 Kakushitsuijaku to lock the target position. After hearing the news from the communication Kido, all the captains and vice-captains were stunned. Aizen actually faked his death? And he slaughtered all the members of the Central 46 by himself? Jin Ekimaru and Kaname Tozen are actually his subordinates? It's not that they are inexperienced, this matter is really too unbelievable, it has exceeded the limit of their imagination. Who would have thought that the captain of the 5th Division, who is always mild-mannered and kind to others, is actually an actor and an ambitious person? His death is fake, his good guy persona is fake, and even the ability of his Zanpakuto is fake. Almost all the Shinigamis have been deceived by him, and this guy doesn't tell a word of truth. Everyone also learned that the captain of the 10th Division, Toshiro Hitsugaya, was knocked down by Aizen and seriously injured. It is still unclear what the purpose of Jin Ekimaru, Kaname Tozen, and Sosuke Aizen is. However, several captains are sure that the three are now enemies and sinners. And soon, the three will become dead. Aizen. Jushiro Yukitake was surprised when he heard the news. He didn't expect that Aizen, the gentle and elegant gentleman with glasses, would also show his true colors. He thought that this person was the same as him. Is he the only honest man left in the entire Soul Society? This is really a sad story. Shunsui Kairaku looked at Uehara Shiroha with admiration and said, "Old man Yama, you fought and lost. Now isn't it time to face the facts and solve the real problem?" Genryusai Shigokuni Yamamoto said nothing, and then suddenly disappeared. Uehara Shiroha and the other two also walked towards the direction where Aizen was. Chapter 120, Aizen almost crashes, and Rukia is reborn. Tozen. Upon hearing the news, Sajin Kamamura's eyes widened, and his face, which resembled an Akita dog, was filled with disbelief. Tozen kept saying that he would uphold justice and respect his friends, but this was the end? This guy had deceived him badly. Without hesitation, he turned around and ran towards the direction where Tozen was. Captain Aizen actually. How is this possible? Momo Hinamori's eyes were filled with tears, and she looked very shocked. She was so worried about Aizen before. Could it be that the perfect captain who was a role model and an example was fake, just an illusion? Nanao Ayase, who was reading a book, said without raising her head, "Commander Uehara said a long time ago that the guy with glasses is not a good person." She knew that the Ryoka and Aizen had caused a big stir in Soul Society, and she had known the inside story for a long time. However, because of Uehara Shiroha's order, she and the T-Gun did not get involved in this matter. Because their T-Gun had already gained the greatest benefit, and they were even a little overwhelmed. It would take a long time for the T-Gun to completely digest the inheritance of the Tsuneyashiro family, and they would have no time to take care of other things in a short time. If the teacher says so, then there is no problem. Momo Hinamori said firmly. The teacher couldn't be wrong. Captain Aizen actually. Thinking of Uehara Shiroa, she didn't feel so bad anymore.
Although before, she thought Captain Aizen was a role model and worthy of her learning and reference in dealing with people. But now it seems that it's just like that. Not to mention, the other party is likely to be a bad guy. The commander has told you to stay here and not move around.
Nanao Ayase said confidently while reading a book.
Don't worry, the commander will solve all the problems.
Whether Aizen is a problem or not, it will not affect us. She has absolute confidence in Uehara Shiroha.
She is very satisfied with her current life.
Because she doesn't like fighting. She also cherishes and enjoys the time with Uehara Shiroha. This is why Uehara Shiroha left Momo Hinamori and Nanao Ayase in the rear.
Because these two people are not strong in fighting spirit and are not suitable for the front line. As a woman and a good apprentice, Rukia Kachiki is actually better at fighting and has a ruthless spirit in her bones. For example, now, facing a series of blows and hardships, she still stares at Aizen with an unyielding look. At this time, she was also attacked by Aizen and his accomplices. He brought people back to the Sokayaku Hill. After discovering that the 5 elements barrier was extremely difficult to deal with, Aizen stepped into the barrier without hesitation, activated the spatial Kido and forcibly took away Rukia Kachiki. He knew that Uehara Shiroha was suspected to be proficient in space abilities, but he still did it. On the one hand, he was in a hurry, and the other hand, he had actually studied the power of space over the years. This was a good opportunity to test his research results, so Aizen naturally couldn't give up. Moreover, this barrier is just a dead object, so what if there are any changes? At this time, Aizen still looked calm. I have to say that Uehara Shiroha attaches great importance to your safety. This barrier actually has the ability to block space, and even I was affected by it.
And it is still protecting you.
At this point, he glanced at the 5 energy veins of different colors on Rukia's body, and thought to himself. Because they have spatial abilities. So even the spatial Kido can't completely get rid of this barrier.
It's really tricky.
Compared to Aizen, the situation of Jin Ikamaru and Kaname Tozen is a bit worse. The white captain's Heiori on the 2 of them is already tattered, and the remaining part is stained with blood. The moment the spatial Kido was activated, the barrier suddenly burst out with terrifying power to attack them. As a result, all 3 of them suffered varying degrees of damage. Tozen and Jin don't have as terrifying spiritual pressure as Aizen, so they are very injured. Now thinking of that terrifying power, the 2 are still scared. Fortunately, the barrier used part of its power to protect Rukia, otherwise their end would only be more miserable.
The 5 elements barrier is more tricky than they thought.
Whether it is the expedition to the Hueco Mundo or the secret control of the Soul Society, they have completed it easily. A mere barrier made them so embarrassed.
This Uehara Shiroha is really unfathomable. I didn't expect Captain Aizen to be wrong again.
Jin narrowed his eyes, spread his hands and said helplessly.
Now that we have arrived at the designated point, how can we retrieve the Hogyoku?
The power of this barrier has not completely disappeared.
Lord Aizen, let me do it. Tozen really didn't dare to underestimate this barrier now.
Before, he was trapped by the barrier, but he thought it was just a coincidence, because he was incompatible with the barrier. After all, his Bankai focused on surprise attacks and assassinations, and the increase in attack power and spiritual pressure was not that great. It was not until the power of the barrier was completely erupted that Tozen realized that it was because of the level difference. The level of this barrier was far beyond his, and it might even surpass the level of the Shinigami. So, he didn't want Aizen to take the risk. After all, he defeated the Captain Commander, so it is normal for him to have some hidden cards.
Aizen said calmly.
Don't worry, the remaining power of the barrier is no longer able to fight back, and can only protect itself.
This time, I won't be wrong. So, next, it's time to retrieve the Hogyoku. I have been looking forward to this moment for a long time.
After saying that, he reached out to grab Rukia. Because of the suppression of Aizen's powerful spiritual pressure, Rukia Kochiki felt dizzy and her body could not move. The feeling of despair and helplessness in childhood came to her heart again. At that time, she met the Shinigami for the first time, and it was also the first time she personally experienced the powerlessness of being crushed by absolute spiritual pressure. However, after feeling the solid and warm power around her body, she forced herself to stay awake and asked Aizen, "What is a Hogyoku?"
"I don't have that thing at all."
Aizen glanced at Rukia Kuchiki and exclaimed, "I'm sorry, I didn't control the strength of my spiritual pressure, but you haven't fainted yet."
"You've become stronger, Rukia."
"Of course, if possible, I hope you don't be too aggressive."
"Because it is meaningless."
Uehara Shiroa, who was coming in a flash step from a distance, was also very pleased to see this scene.
Rukia performed well and did not lose face for her teacher.
Before, in order to fight against the power of the five elements barrier, Aizen released a strong spiritual pressure for defense. With this intensity of spiritual pressure, Rukia should have fainted with her strength, but she held on.
Moreover, in the original timeline, when facing Aizen, Rukia trembled all the time and didn't even dare to speak.
Compared with the original timeline, Rukia has greatly improved in both strength and mind, and can be said to be reborn.
This is his good apprentice.
At this time, Aizen stretched out his hand to Rukia, ready to use special spiritual equipment to retrieve the Hogyoku. It's just that this takes time to adjust, so it can't be done immediately. However, at this moment, with a roar, a tall and slender figure came on a flash step and chopped at Aizen. Ichigo Kurosaki was closest to the Sokayaku hill and heard the message conveyed by Tentikura. So, after sensing the spiritual pressure of Rukia Kuchiki, he quickly rushed over and activated his Bankai to attack Aizen. But even though he was full of anger, he still did not have a strong killing intention, nor did he chop off his head directly, but swung his sword at Aizen's shoulder. However, Aizen's response was beyond his expectations. At the critical moment, Aizen turned around, stretched out a finger, and caught the dark and sharp Tensa Zangetsu. Then, he bent two fingers and pinched the Bankai form of Zangetsu.
"This is impossible." Ichigo Kurosaki was stunned.
He is now in the state of Bankai, and his strength and speed have been greatly improved. Compared with before, his strength has increased several times.
He blocked the Sokayaku. But the opponent caught Zangetsu's blade with just one finger? How is this possible? This is something that even Byakuya Kuchiki can't do. Could it be that this Aizen with broken glasses is stronger than Byakuya Kuchiki?
He even suspected that he was hallucinating.
Tozen remained silent and did not make any movements.
He only used his spiritual sense and spiritual pressure to lock onto Rukia. He knew that the Hogyoku in her body was the key.
The mere Ryoka is not important at all.
Over there, Jin heart sank.
Catching the Bankai Zanpakuto with a single finger. It's still a melee-enhanced slashing type like Zangetsu. This level of skill is too strong. In addition to Aizen, there are probably only two people in the entire Soul Society who can do this. It seems that he has to continue to endure. He only has one chance to make a move, so he must kill with one blow.
"Ichigo, get out of the way,"
Rukia hurriedly reminded him.
She didn't expect Aizen to be so powerful. This person's strength is definitely not at the level of an ordinary captain. If it weren't for the teacher's barrier, she would have died long ago. But she still warned in vain. After pinching Zangetsu, Aizen drew his sword instantly. Ichigo had no time to react and fell to the ground, bleeding profusely.
Ichigo seemed to have returned to the scene when he first fought with Byakuya Kuchiki.
That couldn't even be considered a fight, it was just a crushing of strength. Along the way, he overcame so many difficulties and greatly improved his strength. However, the result was still no different. He was still cut down instantly, and he couldn't even see the other person's sword drawing action.
"Ichigo!"
Rukia screamed, but her body was still unable to move.
How strange.
Aizen looked at the fallen Ichigo Kurosaki and said calmly,
"Just now, I wanted to cut you in half. Is the wound too shallow?"
"Excuse me, Captain Aizen." At this moment, Jin smiled and said, "Just now, I didn't want to spoil your fun, so I let him go." It's okay, Jin, it's just a speck of dust, it won't take much time, anyway we still need to adjust the equipment. After saying that, Aizen's figure suddenly disappeared. When he appeared again, he was already in front of Rukia Kachiki.
Finally, let me answer your questions.
Maybe you don't know that the 4 combat abilities of the Shinigami, namely the Zanjutsu, Hakuda, Ho-Oh, and Kido, actually have limits.
The holification provided by the Hogyoku is the only way to break this limit. Rukia, Kisuke Urahara gave you the Jigai not to help you, but to harm you.
That is a special Jigai, a spiritual equipment that does not contain spiritual power, so it can conceal the aura of spiritual pressure. More importantly, once you put on this special Jigai, the spiritual power of the Shinigami will gradually decrease, and eventually be degraded to an ordinary soul.
Kisuke Urahara did this because he wanted to completely hide the Hogyoku that exists in your soul.
Those troublesome people have not arrived yet, according to the spiritual pressure perception.
Therefore, he was not in a hurry at all, and slowly told the key to the holification, the role of the Hogyoku,
and the beginning of the matter. He said this specifically for Ichigo to hear. This way, he could stimulate the other party's potential to a greater extent. As expected, after hearing this, Ichigo's pupils shrank. He thought of the strange mask that he couldn't throw away, and the strange situation when his body was controlled by someone.
Although he relied on that power to defeat Byakuya Kachiki. However, Ichigo.
He didn't miss the feeling of being out of control at all, and was even a little scared. Just when Aizen had made all the preparations to extract the Hogyoku, something strange happened. A huge figure fell from the sky, punched towards where Aizen was, and let out a fierce roar.
Under the powerful spiritual pressure, a big pit appeared where Aizen was standing.
Aizen turned over lightly and retreated to a distance, standing with Tozen and Jin.
Looking at his old friend, Sajin Kamamura said angrily, "Tozen, do you have anything to defend yourself?"
At this moment, Tozen was like a deaf and dumb person, and he did not respond to his friend's questioning.
"Is that so? Not even a word?"
"I'm sorry, Tozen."
Sajin Kamamura burst out with powerful spiritual pressure, Bankai.
The terrifying spiritual pressure fell like a heavy rain, condensing into a huge human-shaped warrior phantom. Under the continuous effect of the spiritual pressure, the phantom gradually became solid. The nearly 40-meter-long sword in the samurai's hand also became more oppressive. However, at this time, Aizen in the distance sneered.
The next second, Aizen appeared in front of Sajin Kamamura and whispered, "Heido number 90, Kurohitsuji, Black Coffin."
Kurohitsuji is a destructive high-level Kido spell, often considered the pinnacle of Heido, way of destruction. It traps the target in a massive black box, coffin, where dozens of energy spears impale them from all sides, crushing and destroying them inside. Sajin Kamamura looked at Aizen who was in front of him, and then looked at Aizen in the distance, with a confused face. His pupils shook, his brain trembled, and he said in an unbelievable tone, "How is it possible? Isn't Aizen next to Tozen?" At this time, Aizen in the distance broke apart, like a flower in the water, disappearing like the moon in the mirror. And the real Aizen's right hand has condensed something like a black hole. The unimaginable heavy spiritual pressure broke out and gathered around Sajin Kamamura. The black spiritual pressure lines formed a rectangular frame, blocking the internal space. The materialized black spiritual pressure quickly condensed and formed, filling the surface space of the black rectangular block. In the blink of an eye, a huge black coffin completely surrounded Sajin Kamamura's huge body. When the black coffin dissipated, Sajin Kamamura, bleeding, fell heavily to the ground. Instant defeat. Perfect instant defeat. Uehara Shiroa, who was almost there, couldn't help but nod. Apart from anything else, Aizen's black coffin on the Wolf Captain was still quite impressive. Although the Wolf Captain's record was not very good, his defense was the same as the Captain Commander, both 100. The Bankai Kakujo Tengen Myoho has outstanding attack power, and is as tall and mighty as a giant mecha, looking very imposing. However, the weakness is also obvious: the body is too big and too bulky. The most problematic aspect is that this Bankai has owner armor synchronization. If the person is injured, the Bankai will also be affected. If the Bankai is damaged, the person will also be injured, just like a stand user and their stand. Moreover, the strength of Bankai is closely related to the defense and vitality of the user. If an ordinary person possessed this kind of Bankai, he would have bled dry after a battle. However, Sajin Kamamura was still alive and kicking, which shows that his vitality and defense are far superior to those of ordinary Shinigami captains. But even so, the opponent was easily defeated by Aizen's Kido. That calm and relaxed look was full of style and dominance. Even Ichigo Kurosaki, who was lying on the ground, exclaimed, "Is the difference in strength between the two captains so huge? Is he a strong man on the same level as Commander Uehara?" That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated in Bleach World. Thanks so much for listening. As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well. See you in the next one.